Okay, so this game sort of came out of nowhere for me. I only heard about it because of a friend on Facebook. But I was instantly sold on the concept of this Left 4 Dead style Warhammer 40k game. So I just had to get it, and since I happened to get it when it came out this time, of course I'm going to review it. Let me start this off by saying this is probably the most visually impressive Warhammer 40k game to date. Never in the past has there ever been a Warhammer game that looks nearly this good. Every single little detail is shown, both in the environments and the characters. Down to the little tiny decorative bits on your gauntlets, and minutely engraved little prayers on your force sword, and even more brutal gory details like the spinal cords and shredded flesh of your enemies. And while it is undoubtedly visually impressive, there's also a lot of attention to detail spent on the sound design as well. As you play the game, if you just listen, you'll hear everything that's going on, and it sounds great too. The heavy clanking of your character's armored boots on the metal floors, a leaky steam pipe down the hallway hissing over the low hum of the ship's engines, then the clanking footsteps behind a door you're trying to unlock, the alien screech of the Tyranid horde approaching, the frantic hail of bolter and plasma fire as your squad tries to fend them off. It all comes together perfectly to sound exactly like a Warhammer 40k title should. Then also setting aside the fact that the game both looks and sounds amazing, you're still left with a game with frantic, intense action, with all varieties of melee and ranged weaponry, psychic and tech powers, all coming together to show you that you don't need some highly agile Titanfall style super soldier running and jumping off walls, climbing on top of enemies to hump the back of their heads, in order to have gameplay that's fun and exciting. Add on to all that some impressively intelligent enemy AIs, actually employing tactics against you, with massive assaults from the front, meanwhile other Tyranids are trying to get around and flank from behind. So you have to be wary if you actually manage to notice a Tyranid divert course when you're shooting at them, and duck into a hallway or something that might lead to an attack from behind, making it so you have to anticipate where they're trying to go and block off their entrances. And then combine that with all kinds of different variants of enemies like stalkers and broodlords. It serves as just the icing on this already delicious cake. Each mission is laid out so that instead of following a strict path like most shooters, you're put in a large, more open, explorable environment, kind of like Dishonored. And while of course I'm still more partial to a true open world game, seeing this kind of open-ended, take your own path kind of approach being used more often, as opposed to the old school linear go this way and nowhere else approach, is definitely a trend that I love to see. There's also a clear and fulfilling sense of progression in the campaign, with new skills, weapons, and powers unlocked as you get further and further. Combine that with a suspenseful story throughout, keeping you wondering about this cataclysmic prophecy and these visions you've been having. It keeps you interested in the campaign and it makes you want to keep going all the way to the end. While I wouldn't call it the perfect campaign, it is by far one of the better ones we've seen from a game lately, even surpassing some AAA titles, leaving me with a very solid first impression of the game. Unfortunately, while the story's suspense keeps you going for most of the game, it really ends up falling flat in the end, failing to explore and answer a lot of questions you have throughout the game, and instead only choosing to resolve the main plot with the Tyranids, with this very simple the enemies die, the good guys win ending. While it's not that the campaign is too short, it has an estimate time of like 15 hours. Because they never really explore the questions you have at the beginning, it feels like it ends too soon. And so you're left wanting more, but the game's campaign offers little to no replayability, owing mostly to the fact that there's very little collectibles or really any reason to explore beyond the primary objective. And the collectibles that are there aren't very rewarding, and also due to the game's setting, which restricts their design choices a lot. Having it aboard this Space Hulk really makes it so you can only have environments that are spaceships. While I applaud just how much they were able to push those boundaries and make environments that were surprisingly varied, ultimately those boundaries only went so far, and the result is that the levels often feel samey sometimes. And then you'll notice how absolutely retarded the AI teammates are in the campaign, and that'll make you think, maybe the game's meant to be held up by its multiplayer. Boy, have I got news for you. Yep, that's right, you guessed it. The multiplayer in this game is absolutely broken. 90% of the time when you're trying to connect to a match, it'll fail to connect. Never mind if you're trying to look for specific settings on a specific level, you're gonna have the absolute hardest time trying to find a game. And then what's the multiplayer like once you finally do find a match? On the surface it'll seem like pretty much the same deal, except now you have actual players instead of the boneheaded AIs. But once you spend more than 5 minutes playing the multiplayer, you'll find that almost everything you liked about the campaign has been gutted from the multiplayer mode. All of the cutscenes, scripted events, and most of the dialogue is removed when you're playing multiplayer, which removes a lot of the suspense you had in the campaign. Now that kind of thing I understand for making it more replayable, but it should have been an option when you're hosting the game, because if you want to play the campaign through co-op mode, you're gonna miss almost the entire story and all of the epic suspenseful moments. Even the very limited collectibles have been removed from the co-op mode, so there's no reason to explore when you're playing co-op. In addition, roughly half the powers from the single player have been removed from the multiplayer, and those few that remain are either spread across other classes, of which there are more to choose from in multiplayer, or remain on the librarian class but offer you no option to change them. And then add on top of that each class only has like 2 or 3 choices of weapons, since all the weapons that were available to you in the single player mode have been spread out across all these 5 classes, which makes it difficult next to impossible to make your own custom builds like you were able to do in the campaign. And that brings up another example of how this game's dedication to lore and rulebook accuracy has worked against it. Never mind the weapons they could have added while still being accurate to the lore, but they could have added even more options for weapons if they just bent the rules a little bit. And then progression works entirely differently in multiplayer than it does in the campaign. Differently as in it's gone. When hosting a match you have an option to either go with codex rules or regular rules, and under regular rules your levels reset every match, and then at the beginning of the match you start at level 1 and have to work your way up mid-mission to unlock all the powers and weapons available to your class. Meanwhile, if you do codex rules, every power and weapon is available to you from the start, but the leveling system's gone. So no matter which mode you prefer, there's absolutely zero permanent progression in the multiplayer. Now that all the problems with the multiplayer are talked about, there are still a few general issues with the game. While the sound design for the most part is fantastic, there are a few sounds that just have the volume jacked up really high for no apparent reason.
To counter our operation,
Jesus.
steal a human hybrid at Lost Caliban.
Quiet down a bit. There we go. Good. Next, this game has absolutely no soundtrack, and it might sound like a small thing when you first hear that, but not having any kind of music playing during the game at all really impacts the feel of the gameplay. Excuse me, I failed? How and why? Calculation running, I think that's timer we have there at the top. Timer where we have to eliminate the psychers. Did not realize we were on a timer. See, some music would have been helpful to make us realize we're on a fucking timer here. Something like intense, like, oh no, the Tyranid fleet's coming, you gotta hurry, disable the psychers. But no, we don't have that. We just have this relaxed, no music type thing going. Makes me think I can take my time. Hell, because this game has no soundtrack, the really observant ear might have noticed I'm actually using Dawn of War's soundtrack for this review. In fact, just to show how important this is to a game, I'm gonna start using Space Hulk Deathwing soundtrack for the rest of this review. Yep, that's right, let's cut the track, do it. Right then, now that distraction's gone, the melee combat in the game is really awkward and clunky. This is especially problematic when such a large portion of the gameplay revolves around melee. Actions don't really queue up while you're holding down the buttons, so for example, if you take a melee swing and then try to block, if you press the block button before the animation for the melee attack was finished, you'll have to release the block button and press it again in order to get your guard back up. The same applies for power attacks, which are done by holding down the attack button. If you do it in the middle of another action, it won't queue up and you'll have to release the button and press it again to get it to work. These kinds of small errors lead to the melee system feeling awkward at worst and clunky at best. And oftentimes the menus try to use these lore-accurate phrases instead of saying simple things like try again or quit, leading to some uncertainty as to what you're actually doing when you're pressing certain buttons in the menus. Or some of the power descriptions in single player, where it talks about giving you the power to smite your enemies instead of actually telling you what the power does. And it just serves as one final example of how this game's held back by its accuracy to the lore and rulebooks. Despite the game having many flaws, I don't actually have a whole lot to talk about for this section. All the problems holding this game back are obvious, and it's clear that they just need to be fixed. Make more weapons available to every class in multiplayer, for example. Fix the multiplayer, for example. Compose a goddamn soundtrack for the game. You get the idea. But I did also notice, though, given the game's similarities to Left 4 Dead, it is missing two major things that Left 4 Dead did that made it so popular and long-lasting. Those being versus mode and mod support. Now, I don't want some kind of Terminator deathmatch. I want something more like Left 4 Dead when I say versus mode. A mode where 4 players play as the advanced strains of Gene Stealers and the other 4 play as Terminators. But apart from that, functions exactly like a regular mission. And I figure with all the vents and caves explorable only by the Tyranids, I think it'd be a perfect fit for this game. And as for mod support, the game is clearly lacking in some environmental variety. Left 4 Dead didn't even have that problem, and it benefited hugely from mod support. So I can only imagine what it would do for Space Hulk. Thinking about people making their own maps, outdoor maps, cityscapes, snowy mountain ranges, maybe even facing different enemies like facing orcs instead of the Tyranids, and seeing custom campaigns following other Space Marine chapters besides the Dark Angels, maybe even being able to play as other kinds of Space Marines aside from Terminators. I could go on and on about what can be done if they added mod support, but the possibilities are just endless, so I'm gonna stop it there and assume you get the idea. So for the final verdict on this game, I'm gonna have to rate it a 7 out of 10. It has definitely got one of the best campaigns we've seen this year. Unfortunately, the game only runs about a $40 price tag, so if all you're looking for is a good, decent length campaign, and you don't mind that the game overall will only last you about 15 hours, Space Hulk Deathwing certainly justifies its price. But because of so many glaring flaws that make themselves obvious as soon as you finish the campaign, I can't bring myself to give it a higher rating than a 7. But this could have been an 8 if the multiplayer had only worked properly, and even a 9 if they let you play multiplayer in the same way as the campaign and with the musical score added to the game. As hopefully I've helped you realize with the end of this review that a musical score makes a huge difference. I don't know what it is about the 40k license that keeps attracting these fatal errors to their games. But with Dawn of War 3 coming just on the horizon, and the massive success of previous iterations of that game, there's still hope yet for fans of Warhammer 40k video games, but it just isn't this game. Till then, I'll see you all next time. I'll be seeing you next time you're on sale.